Our next work of art for the imperial period, you've probably already seen it before. It's in a lot of movies. It's referenced all the time. It's a site of bloodshed. It's a site of gladiators, life, death, and logic, reason, control. Being a Roman is to understand the Colosseum. Ooh, ah. It's commonly referred to as the Colosseum, but if we were alive at the time of the Roman Empire, we would have more likely called it the Flavian Amphitheater. It got the nickname Colosseum, but its official name was the Flavian Amphitheater. What? Flavian Amphitheater? What are these words, Miss Cortez? Okay, calm down. It's named after the emperor who paid for its construction. His name, Emperor Flavius Vespasian. And yes, in this class, we are looking at quite a few Roman emperors, but we're not looking at all of them. And we're not looking at a lot of the major players because we have to limit ourselves. And if you want to know more about the Roman Empire and you know more about the Roman Empire, I know it can be frustrating that we're not talking about some of the notorious early Roman emperors like Claudius, Nero, Caligula. We just can't get into all of that. Instead, I want to introduce you to Vespasian. Emperor Flavius Vespasian. Emperor Flavius Vespasian came at a time when we desperately needed a good leader. After Augustus, there was a series of really horrific, bad emperors. And each one seemed to be more corrupt and disgusting than the one before him. Remember, as a Roman, we reserve the right to kill any of our emperors we do not like. And so we killed the Emperor Nero. And with that, there was a power vacuum and a civil war broke out. So remember, we're going to see this pattern. Emperor's death equals civil war power vacuum, okay? When we killed Nero, there was a power vacuum, and several leading generals stationed throughout the empire decided to take it for their own. Vespasian was one of those generals, and behind him, he had an extremely loyal army. He takes control of the city of Rome, therefore inheriting the title of Imperator. He becomes our next emperor, and the people of Rome love him for it, because unlike the horrific, corrupt, disgusting emperors that we had before, Vespasian, well, what was Vespasian? He's trying to tell you in this portrait here. This is an official royal portrait. His nose is missing because it fell off. But what kind of a man is he presenting us? Is he presenting to us? What kind of a leader is he? We see an older man, experienced, wise. He's not trying to hide his age because we know exactly who he is. He's one of the most successful Roman generals. So as a successful Roman general, he brings age, he brings wisdom to his leadership. What about the set of that mouth? Serious? Stern at times? But you know what? We wanted that at this time. We had so many emperors who are all about debauchery that we wanted somebody more serious, more stable, more stern to end corruption. And that's exactly what Vespasian promised, and that's what he brought. Now, during his time as emperor, he also, around the empire, instilled or initiated construction. And one of the major construction projects was at a site in the city of Rome itself. He built an amphitheater. So that is why it's called the Flavian Amphitheater, because his family name, Flavius, Vespasian Flavius, or the Latin way of saying it would be your last name first, Flavius Vespasian. Now here we are looking at an aerial view of the Colosseum, the amphitheater, and that brings us to our next point of understanding. What is an amphitheater? It comes from the Greek concept of a theater. The Greeks had lots of theaters, and you know the Romans, they love all that Greek stuff. But technically, a theater is a half-circle seated area that sits in front of a skene or a scene, a backdrop, a stage. Here is an example of a theater. An amphitheater comes from the word amphi, which is Greek for double. So an amphitheater is doubling up of a theater. Do you see how you make an amphitheater? You take two theaters and put them side by side, thus creating a circular seating area. So theater is a half circle, amphitheater is a double theater. So let's think about it again. A Flavian amphitheater. Flavian because Vespasian Flavian made it or paid for it, and then amphitheater because that's the shape that it is. Ignore the 62 down there. It's just a default that happens on some of the PowerPoint slides. It numbers them. So we're looking here at what remains of the amphitheater. Doesn't look that great, does it? What we're looking at is really the inner core of what was once an extremely splendid structure. It was 3 levels high and 3 rows deep. What's happened is hundreds of years of this site being in disrepair or modified use. Portions of it, large portions of it, collapsed with various earthquakes. The structure that remains is the cement inner core, the concrete inner core. It was built of concrete. Remember, the Romans, they love concrete. It's most efficient. And then it was lined with marble and travertine, which is another kind of beautiful decorative stone work. So what we see here, think of almost like a tooth. It's like a tooth that's lost all the enamel, and we're just looking at the root of the tooth, and portions of that tooth have fallen apart. What was the function of this space? Gladiator fight, death! Yes, I hear you. It was, and we'll talk more about that. It also served as a venue or a site for public events. And it's not the only one in Rome. Every legit Roman city and town had an amphitheater. Okay, here, this is the slide I want you to see. There are a lot of ancient Roman amphitheaters. Here we are looking at an amphitheater in the city of Verona, Italy. Verona, that sounds familiar. It's the site where Shakespeare placed the tragic play of Romeo and Juliet. Spoiler alert, there really was no real Romeo and Juliet. But here in the city of Verona, you can see their amphitheater, and it still is used today. They still have performances inside. There's a flea market that happens every month in the space. So what is an amphitheater and how is it used? What's its function? An amphitheater is a space where orators, public speakers would come, where news would be disseminated. This is a space where magistrates or governors, if they wanted your support on a matter, they would hold public rallies in these amphitheaters. It was part of a Roman nobleman's identity and duty to also give charity or to perform charitable acts. And so amphitheaters might be spaces where noble families would give out bread or money or resources to the poor. These also would be used for reenactments of mythology, and yes, gladiator events would happen. So the Flavian Amphitheater is just one of these. There are many amphitheaters all over the place. This one in Rome gets a lot of attention because it's the biggest and it was the grandest and it was in the capital city of Rome. And therefore, the most important, the one everybody talked about. The nickname Colosseum, which has the root word colossus or giant. Many people think that that's because, well, it was so big, right? No, that's a good assumption, but that's not actually the case. Yes, it had a carrying capacity of somewhere between 50,000 to 87,000 people. And it's estimated that the cost of construction in today's inflation rates would be about $683 million to build this thing. But that is not why it's called the Colosseum. It's a colossus, not because of its size, but because of its location next to a Colossus statue of Nero. What are you talking about, Miss Cortez? I'm so lost right now. Okay, this is an artist reconstruction of the Colosseum, and it's showing you the three major levels, or the three main levels, and the three steps out, fleshed out, and we're going to look at this in more detail. But I want you to pay attention to this statue right here. You see it? It was a gigantic Colossus statue of the previous emperor before Vespasian. His name was Nero. And Nero had erected this monstrosity of a statue here. And this site where the Colosseum is located was part of a larger pleasure palace and gardens for Nero. It's located in the heart of the city, the center of Rome. The center of the empire and the center of that city. Nero took the land from the people. He was like, I'm the emperor and everybody loves me, so I'm going to be in literally the center of attention with this massive public land, and I'm going to make it private land for me. And he had this big giant palace and these pleasure gardens and this giant statue of him. We kill Nero. And then Vespasian says, you know what? I'm going to give this land back to you. And he builds a public space, the amphitheater, on the property. The statue of Nero is converted into a statue of Apollo. And so it gets the nickname Colosseum because it is located next to a colossus. Here he is now as Apollo, with the golden rays of Apollo's halo. Thanks, Vespasian. So that's another reason we love Vespasian. He gave back the land to the people for our own pleasure, our own use. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let's talk about the exterior. The exterior was constructed of 3 levels of rounded arches. Within each of those rounded arches were statues of the major gods and goddesses and emperors of Rome. To access these 3 levels, there were interior staircases that would rise up, and these corridors wrapped all the way around the amphitheater. To get inside of the amphitheater, there were 76 numbered gateways. Over each of the archways on the ground floor are these numbers. It's the same concept that we use today. Think about when you go to a concert or a sporting event and there's labels for the gates. Oh, you call your friend, where are you? I'm over by gate A. Why are you over there? We parked by gate D. So here we have that same kind of system of here, your ticket is past this gate number. Enter in on this side. And there were 76 of them. 4 of them were reserved as grand or imperial entrances. They were designated for, the VIPs. Inside of the, here's some more. Look at that. Once inside, you would sit according to your social status. 3 levels, 3 status. First level was for the nobility. Second, for the working class, craftsmen. Third, the poor, slaves, and women. Huh? What do you mean, Ms. Cortez? I don't understand. Think about it today. When you buy a ticket, what are the most expensive seats? Floor seats. Get up close right with the action, right? So that is, in this case, designated for the most important people within the Roman Empire. That's for the senators. That's for the magistrates, the governors. Then the second floor, just like today, not as expensive, but pretty good. That's for the working class, the craftsmen. And then the third, nosebleed seats. They're cheap, but at least we're here, right? That was the space reserved for slaves, for the poor, and for women. Yes, women, you could go to the Colosseum, but you couldn't sit with your husband. You are a woman. You don't actually count, so you go up at the top. Now, I usually have a student in class who will raise their hand at this point and then ask, but what about the Empress? Would she have to go sit up there? No, you know the rules don't apply to the rich. Of course the Empress doesn't have to. So the Empress, she's powerful. She sits down there with her husband on the first floor. But think about this in terms of a larger reflection of Rome. Even going into a public space, you are defined by your social status. And think about your sight line. You are sitting with those around you of your status. If you are above, you are farther away from the action. You're literally farther away from the action governing Rome. And you see those who are more important than you. You cannot forget your social status within the confines of this space. It is like a microcosm of the larger empire itself. Wow. Now, as I said, it was lined in marble and travertine veneer, brightly colored, and then the interior corridors had mosaic ceilings of all these bright colors and patterns and scenes. Here. You can visit it today. It is open to the public, but you need to buy a ticket, and it closes at sunset. I tell you that because I had the unfortunate experience of wanting to go to the Colosseum and then waiting too long to buy my ticket. They closed the ticket booth. I didn't get to go inside the Colosseum until the next day. So, okay, here we are looking at it from the inside, and you can see how those levels of seats, you can see some of the seats have been restored here. The seats were lined in marble, and there were stairways on either side. I mean, this is like shockingly similar to when you go to a sporting event or a concert, right? the next question that students might ask is, where are all the seats now? Well, I told you, it was lined in marble and travertine. And after the fall of the Roman Empire, well, these spaces are no longer needed. There was a dramatic drop in population, and so it was abandoned. And as people needed to build new things or repair other buildings, and you needed some stone, why would you go far? Just go chop off some of the Colosseum and take it with you. So the site became almost like a quarry, a place where you could take stone and build something else. Many parts of the city of Rome are built from portions of the Colosseum. So let's use our imagination. Let's add in those rows of seats. Additionally, oh my goodness. Additionally, imagine you're sitting here and it's hot. It's a hot summer day in Rome. It gets really bright. That sun is hot. It gets intense. And there is no roof on the Colosseum. Well, actually, there was. It was a retractable roof. The Romans. Along the roof line, there were poles, large wooden poles set around the exterior of the amphitheater. And each of these poles was connected to a system of ropes and pulleys and large pieces of canvas fabric. There were men stationed around the roof line. And what they did is, using the system of ropes and pulleys, they basically made these large retractable sails. Think of like a sail ship, those big pieces of canvas. However, they were going out and into the negative space over the Colosseum. And what they did was create these panels of shade. Now, the men who were stationed around the exterior were sailors, so they're totally familiar with ropes, pulleys, and canvases. And then they would manipulate this canvas roof around, following the pattern of the sun to give the interior the most amount of shade. Isn't that fantastic? I love that so much. Okay, so now let's imagine that we are here at the Colosseum and we come in through our appropriate gateway, right? And then we sit down in our appropriate social status level. And what are we going to see? Well, whatever public event is going to happen, it's going to happen in the center. And that center is what we are looking at here. Now, the current site has built back a portion of the center stage. It was a wood paneled floor, and then the other half has been left open to show you the understage. And the understage was a series of hallways and rooms, and then through these hallways and rooms and under the wood paneled stage would be a series of elevator shafts. This is a diagram of one of those elevators. So the elevator would bring in whatever was in the lower chamber up through a trap door in the wood floor and then reveal. And this is how things like, if you're familiar, gladiator fights, where a gladiator would be out there fighting and then like boom, a tiger shows up and then the gladiator has to fight the tiger. These kinds of events really did happen in the Colosseum, and it would be the tiger would be in a cage underneath the floor, and then a stage door would open, the elevator would ba-ba, and then here comes the tiger. Ah! So as it stands today, the restoration and preservation of the Colosseum has kept a portion of the stage, or not kept, has built a portion of the stage so that you get that sense of a larger space, but then they don't want to hide the cool inner working network underneath the stage. Here is a cutaway view of the senators, the equestrians, which are kind of like nobility but not as important as the senators. And then the intermediate category would be the working class men, craftsmen, and then ladies, poor, were up here. Great. Now, our next video is going to be talking about what happens inside of the Colosseum and then how that is balanced by the exterior of the Colosseum.